So I've learned to trust this higher aspect of myself. And what's so often happens in my experience is when you do that, the first thing that you think is that you're going to get all these signs and synchronicities that are going to show you you've made the right decision. Not in my experience. Generally, all hell breaks loose, I like to say. And I say this to some people I perceive the same thing as with, is often they'll come back to me and say, I made the wrong decision by listening to my higher self because all hell is broken loose. Let me tell you, sometimes things have to break down to break through.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Your Superior Self. Today I have one of my good friends, Paul Williams, joining the show. Paul, man, like I just love our conversations. They seem to get more and more just like, I don't know, like higher like frequency, more higher vibration, like more in depth. And I feel like I've known you my entire life right now. So thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. I love coming back and having a chat with you and your audience. It's great. It gets me in the flow.
It's funny
It's
because
kind
like
of my favorite place to be.
we both have like the same shirt on. I just realized this. Like we have the same like little
Oh, there we go.
salmon colored t-shirt. Like
Yeah,
we're
salmon.
connected right now, dude. Like we're connected.
That's it.
We're vibing right now. What so what are you doing? Like what are you up to right now? Like what's going on? Like how busy are you?
Well, more than I thought that I would like to be. I was having a conversation with Sarah, actually, Sarah Breastman Cosme, who is a friend of mine. I know you've interviewed her as well. And we were sort of having this chat about lack of sleep. And it was an interesting one because I have had less sleep than I would have liked to over the last couple of months. And she actually said she was getting information on this from her subjects through hypnosis. And she said a lot of people's higher awareness or higher consciousness comes in and says, you don't actually need as much sleep as you may think you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that goes against a lot of traditional ways of thinking. You know, we're told we need 8 hours sleep minimum to have a good, rested, healthy body. And she was actually saying the higher awareness is saying no to a lot of people, that they don't need as much as they think they do, particularly if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Why is that, you think?
Well, I always like this concept. You know, a lot of people talk about time management, right? We hear this concept everywhere. Time management. How do you manage your time? Tips to manage your time. Books have been written about the subject. But when we think about that, right, you can't really manage time. And I just thought, you know, time is an illusion anyway. Dolores taught us that. But rather than trying to manage it, why don't we prioritize and work out what is a priority and what's not? And so that's, rather than managing something, we want to sort of prioritize it. So what are my priorities? What is most important? You know, I think for a lot of us that have families, I think that's got to be right up there. Mm-hmm. So obviously you want to have adequate family time. You want to be a good parent, a good, you know, for me, I have a dog. So I've got
golden retriever,
a lot of
right?
time that I have to spend just going through all of the, and it's a puppy, mind you. So it's quite consuming when it comes to time.
Is it a golden retriever?
Time.
Is it a golden retriever?
I think we call it Dachshund, which is the German pronunciation, but in the US, I think you call it a wiener dog or a sausage dog.
I could have swore I saw on social media. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else. I could have swore I saw your post with a golden retriever. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, they kind of look like in his face, he looks like a golden retriever, but he's a little wiener.
How many times have you been called that in your life?
Yeah, sure.
I know I have. Going back to Dolores, man, you've done a lot of work. Uh, you know, a lot of work as far as putting her content out there into the world and allowing people to kind of find it for themselves. I think it resonates with where you're at, and you just kind of where you start exploring more um, of who you are. Like this information starts flowing to you. When did that start flowing for you? I don't know if we discussed it in the first one, but like when did you start picking up on Dolores?
Well, it came very late in my spiritual journey, actually. It was probably 12 or 14 years into my spiritual journey, and I had been through a lot of different phases of that. It started with, I think we shared this before together, Eckhart Tolle, and he was sort of the catalyst of my awakening experience. And then I explored so many different authors and speakers, and my Audible account would show that because I got hundreds of Audibles that I've downloaded because one author would lead on to more information and a different book and a different a phase that I would go through. And eventually I found Dolores's content and books, and it had such a huge and profound impact on my life
Mhm.
because there's something about the energy. And I know for a lot of people first coming into her content, it can be quite convoluted. And in fact, some of her books are called The Convoluted Universe, and some of these concepts are just way out there.
Mhm.
And certainly when she was alive, she's passed on now. That information, when it first came out, was, rarely understood by people. And she didn't have a lot of people that knew about her during her time when she was alive. She was doing really small conferences. And it was only in the last couple of years that actually, can we stop for one moment?
Sure.
I've got a dog that's scratching at the door, and I think audio wise, it's not going to be great. So I would rather stop it, take care of him, and then um,
Well, go ahead. I get it, dude. I get it. My golden, she is just like that. My kids too. If I don't give them attention, they
yeah,
just kind of seem to keep it coming back with a greater force.
yeah, I know. Anyway,
Um,
I try not to react to it anymore. I used to get really agitated by it, and I think I just allow it to be. I tell people I'm really upfront. I need to stop. Can we fix this rather than
No worries, man. This is I love how this is laid back. I love these conversations because it doesn't need to be like professional or fake or whatever. Like
yeah,
it just needs to be
totally.
authentic. Like if we could be our most authentic selves more, I feel like there would be more growth and understanding amongst people, especially with that connection that we just, we all truly want, right? With one another. I mean, community to me is the is the doorway to growth because one you're connecting with other people and you're learning more about how we can vibe, right? And I know that there's so much like turmoil and there's so much dividedness out in the world, but that's just because of perspective. I mean, that's all about our belief systems, and a lot of it has to do with culture, but I mean, being conscious of that difference, right? Just thinking about that, right? Like I never really thought about that until like I started learning about culturalism in psychology and having a different perspective about people's, how they were brought up, how they're, how they do things in different countries. Like I just never had that. I was never conscious of that. There's so much more to wherever you're at in this world, just by how you were brought up, Paul. Like, and I'm assuming it was in Australia, right? Like, I mean, it's totally different than the States. I mean, yeah, we have a kind of a similar background, but I mean, and we're here for a reason. Like you and I are speaking, I think for definitely for a higher reason. But there's just so many things, experiences in our lives that are so different. But we lose track of that because I don't know if it's the ego. I don't know what that is, but we start thinking that our way is the best way, and we don't necessarily take in consideration someone else's upbringing or subjective experiences.
Yeah. Well, it's also human conditioning.
Hmm.
And for thousands, at least years, we've evolved as humanity out of tribes and to be tribal, to be separate. And then religion eventually came along, and that was a further separating of groups. And then a religion would war against another, and our God is the only true God. And this division has gripped humanity from probably its inception. And this is why, a lot of spirituality points to, this real great truth that I think in this duality that we find ourselves in can be quite hard to comprehend, that at our essence, at our core, we are actually in fact all one. And from the perspective of the division, it's very hard to see that. I always point to the fact that it's more about the energy or the dimension within us all that is of that same dimension. But for most people, it actually rarely has an opportunity to come through. And we spoke about this last time, being trapped in the egoic mind or the analytical aspect of ourselves that tends to run us almost like a computer program for most of our waking life. In fact, some people are not even aware of that there is a different aspect to themselves.
To that point, right? You practice a modality called QHHT, right? You are a practitioner. You are a level 2, I do believe. And
yes,
you've had experiences with this modality as being one of the clients. When you're in that state of consciousness where you're connected with your higher self, are you aware, or are you kind of unconscious to that conversation?
no, you're completely aware. And this is a bit of a misconception. It feels so natural and so normal to you. You're so conscious of everything that is occurring that a lot of people will walk away, or even during the session itself, and they'll get into the analytic part of the mind and think that, well, hang on, this is just me communicating. This is just me talking. I'm just answering questions, because they expected that it was going to be some kind of out of body experience. And don't get me wrong, people have had phenomenal experiences through this. But generally, I find, and I communicate with a lot of other practitioners, I find that it's probably a lot more in the realms of what we're used to than we think it's going to be. And I know some people can be disappointed by that because they're expecting, some grand, spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that's not what we need most of the time. I always say to people, you get exactly what you need when you have a session. And I think what it often demonstrates to people is that this aspect of ourselves does feel very normal. It does communicate in very similar ways than we're used to hearing, because we do hear this higher aspect rather of ourselves all the time, but we rarely give it credit or pay attention. And so it's not something foreign to you. It's something actually very natural to you.
So we doubt that because we've been told that little voice in our head is nothing more than just our imagination.
Yeah, it's you imagining. It's I think we all experience the voice in the head. I like the analogy that's been given in media so much is that, you got an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and they're both having a conversation with you, telling you different, aspects of the same thing.
Sure.
From the opposite point of view. And that is kind of like, and I don't want to demonize the ego because it is a useful aspect of ourselves, but it is like that in a way where we get one lot of information from the higher aspect, and then we get it from the analytical aspect. And this is where we often feel an inner conflict, because they will often tell us to go into completely different directions.
Can you give us an example of that for yourself, right? Like an example that a
Yeah.
conversation you've had with your higher self where your analytical mind was like, no, I'm not doing that. Or like that can't be true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I almost come across it every single day, even in my work. So, for example, I might be wanting to do a particular project. And I recently did this with teaming up someone that and I know you've interviewed on here. I don't know if that's come out yet. Is Blair Styra, or
Hmm.
Tabash, who is the entity that Blair channels. I was given the message to basically put him on tour here in Australia, and we've done so. There's two appearances. It's called a conversation with Tabash, and it's on in Melbourne and Sydney here in Australia. And my analytical mind said, doesn't make sense. No one else is doing that. You won't sell tickets. It won't be profitable. It won't be worth your time. It won't be worth his time, all of these things. But the higher awareness said you need to do it. And it was me that has learned to trust that, even in the face of all of the reasons not to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we come up against this a lot in our lives, in our daily lives. We're told to go in a particular direction, and everything in our experience and our perceived wisdom would say that's not a good choice. Do it the way you've always done it. Don't do that. Don't take the risk. Don't step out. I always say that if our analytical mind was so smart and so intelligent as it likes to give us the impression it is, why are we stuck in some of the messes and the habitual patterns that we are? It's a good question. There's no judgment in that statement. So I've learned to trust this higher aspect of myself. And what's so often happens in my experience is when you do that, the first thing that you think is that you're going to get all these signs and synchronicities that are going to show you you've made the right decision. Not in my experience. Generally, all hell breaks loose, I like to say. And I say this to some people I perceive the same thing as with, is often they'll come back to me and say, I made the wrong decision by listening to my higher self, because all hell is broken loose. Let me tell you, sometimes things have to break down to break through. And collectively, I think what you and what a lot of your audience will notice is that we're going through that in a collective way at the moment, aren't we, in the world?
Sure.
Because things are breaking down. And I hear from a lot of people, because I'm well connected on social media, as you know. So I read all of the comments, in fact. And a lot of people will say, when I put out positive information, you're completely not with it. You're off the pulse. This information's obviously outdated, because don't you see what is happening out there? And I will often go back and say, well, things have to break down for them to break through. It's the process of evolution. It is always how any evolution has occurred.
Well, it seems like every time I speak with you, right? Like, Paul, you're this positive, upbeat guy. Like, we've had long conversations in the past where you're bringing me out of a funk, or a rut, just because of changes in my energy levels, right? Like that breakthrough that we were just talking about. Like, I experience it, and it definitely comes through. But it's hard for me to think that you're doubting yourself. I feel like you've got like this inner knowing, and like you're just, it just shows that, we're all doubting ourselves. We're all just kind of learning. We're all just kind of on that path of like self-realization, self-actualization. But I've noticed, like, the more that, and Tabash, he said something to me, not Tabash, excuse me, Blair. I haven't done Tabash yet, but Blair has commented to me that, when I go on runs, I need to take the headphones out, right? Like, I need to be with myself more. And I find that being with myself more that I'm finding my connection with my higher self strengthening, because now I can decipher which voice is mine and which voice is the higher self, if that makes sense.
Well, that's a great example. And I had a similar thing. I would always have my AirPods in when I headphones running around, doing workouts and runs and exercise. And in fact, I felt that I remember times of leaving the AirPods at home or the phone at home and having to go back because I thought I couldn't do the workout without it. I needed the inspiration and the pump from it. And I learned that I needed to really have some times where I do that and then sometimes silence. And I think for a lot of us, we're terrified of the silence.
Mm-hmm.
Because we tend to hear a lot when it's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't like what we're hearing because the higher self is communicating. And maybe it's telling us the same thing over and over again. And we just want it to shut up.
Sure. Well, even the feelings too, right? Like we want to avoid being alone with our own thoughts, with our own feelings. That's why we come home from work. If it's a stressful day. We'll try to have a beer or watch a show or a movie or something like that to escape those emotions or those thoughts. But in actuality, like we need to go into that. Like we need to go into that ourselves, explore that, be with those, because they're not us ultimately. Like a thought is not who I am, or one of my emotions, one of my many emotions that I experience daily is not who I am. They're fleeting. What I am is forever. And connecting with that awareness, like it shows me, like, trust me, I'm human. I'm a human being. I still have negative thoughts. I still have, what do they call it in psychology? Adjustment reactions to different, environments and experiences in my life. And that's part of the human condition. But one way that we can kind of get through those more is if we sit in the noise and we just be, and we learn that we're not those environments, we're not those external environments, we're not those thoughts, we're not the emotions, we are just the awareness that is surrounding by that. And our true power is in choice. Like you have a choice to do that. Like I have a decision right now. If I want to fuel those negative thoughts and fuel those negative feelings with more continuous negative feelings and emotions, which create more chaos in my reality, or I can say, stop, I want to rewire my brain. This is not who I am. I choose not to have this experience. And I start feeding myself positivity. And I know sometimes those moments are hard because we're in such bad spots. Either it's a trauma or a negative experience, and we don't think we can get through it. You got to go broad, and you got to figure, say something to yourself to snap yourself out of it. You can start small, just by a small affirmation to get yourself going in that positive direction. And it's through rewiring your brain that you start creating these new patterns in your life, which feed and expand in other areas and overflow. And you find yourself like just, a different person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we get so caught in this, paradigm of reality that we forget who and what we truly are at our essence. I mean, even having this conversation now, you're assuming the role of interviewer and I'm assuming the role of guest, and then we're playing accordingly to that structure. But if we drop all of those labels and we just are more authentic, then there is more of an opportunity for something else. I call it a different dimension of us to come in to this space. When you realize that you aren't the interviewer, you're not the person, you're not the persona, you are the awareness that is using that as your form of expression, then you open up. And this is where the greats have learnt this, is to open up a dimension into this one, where this higher awareness, healing, energy, whatever we want to label it, and they're also just labels, can come in.
Yeah, they're just labels, right? Like language is essentially just a tool for us to understand our reality, right?
Yeah.
They're just things that we make to help, just like time, right? Like just it's a tool.
And there are beings in different dimensions, and Dolores spoke a lot about this in her books, Dolores Cannon, that don't even use a language to communicate. They have other forms of communication. So it is actually quite a primitive tool that we think we're so intelligent. We think that we're so articulate. And I know lots of people who can speak multiple languages, and they'll be very proud of the fact that they can do so. As complex as the words that we can use, it's still a very limited form of communication between people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just waiting for the telepathic channels to open up, and for us, well, I guess we'll be out of business, podcasters, if that ever happens, because then we won't need a mic, we won't need to do any of this, because we'll just be able to talk, through states
we'll be
of
doing it in
consciousness.
different ways.
Yeah, I guess
this is what I think I come up against this in my work all of the time. And this is really what defines, I think, true leadership, true people that are on the leading edge and they're actually genuinely helping people, is that we're always so afraid of putting ourselves out of a job. We don't want to give away too much information in our course because we're afraid someone will take the information and then basically replace it and outdo us and become competition. I don't like to see or think that even though I'm naturally competitive, I don't need to win that you have to lose. Everyone can win. We get caught in that paradigm, even in the spiritual community. Well, I need to get these people because there's only a certain amount of people, and I need to win, and you need to lose for me to win. No, that is just a complete misconception. Everyone can win. And any true leader, anyone that's truly leading, will recognize this, is that we have to get to a point where we don't subscribe to this belief that it's all about us, because it doesn't matter how great you think you are and how much goodness you bring into the world. You'll probably if you died, you'll probably trend on Twitter for 24 hours and then people will move on.
Oh.
And this is the real fact. If we this is why I don't get into ego with numbers and videos and all of that. I wouldn't even make it to Twitter to trend. So that is how significant it is. But if you are generally inspiring people and replacing yourself essentially through different aspects, then you are leaving a lasting mark. And people like Dolores Cannon have done that because she inspired me, that I can go and inspire others. And she's one example. But unless we are inspiring other people, we're just taking up space.
Well, what do you want your legacy to be, right? Like, I hate that I even asked that question, right? But it's kind of like, well, where do you want to go? Because I feel like you're at this pivotal moment in your life where you're making a shift of momentum, and like you're going in a direction, and I can kind of see it unfolding, as you go along. Like, have you thought about that long term? Like, what is it that you really want to?
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's very simple. I want to leave the world a better place than I came into it. I want to inspire and help other people more than I help myself. And I'm also one of these people that believes you can have it all. I don't think that we shouldn't be ambitious, that we shouldn't achieve our goals. I think we can have all of those things. But if you're doing it from a very egoic sense of the, from angle is what I'm trying to say. If you're doing it from an egoic angle, what benefit does that have on others? Because really, our impact on the world around us is where our superpower lies. It's not in self-proclamation. That's the old structure of the old paradigm of thinking. It's really in our ability to leave a mark or change the energy of others around us. That's what's important. So to answer your question, my legacy is to inspire others and empower others to find that all of the answers have always been inside of them.
I love that. Yeah. And and hypnotherapy, I mean, they literally come from within you, right? Like, because you're not you're the facilitator, right? But you're not the one that is giving the healing in the session. It's coming from the higher self, and it's
Yeah.
coming from within, right? Like, um, I know I love talking about examples and case studies of this. But I mean, as you go along, are you seeing, is there a change in the message from the higher self? Is it consistent? Like, is it different for each individual?
Yeah, well, it is. It tends to be very different. You know, I can never predict, or no practitioner could ever predict what someone is going to get, and often it's very practical. The examples are practical. Um, it never surprises me because I learn something every time I have a session with a client. I learn new concepts. I learn different ways that the higher self communicates. Um, and it's fascinating to me how, when we don't listen to our higher awareness, how we get all of these, let's say, obstacles or perceived obstacles happen within our physical body or in our life that we ourselves create.
Mhm.
And that's a really interesting thing, discovering that.
Mhm.
But when I talk about hypnosis, when I talk about QHHT, I like to remind people, because a lot of people get very excited about the concept. They want to have a session, and I think that is great. But what that really teaches you, and what Dolores Cannon, all of her 19 books really teach you, is this one spiritual principle that's been there from the beginning. And that is that the power, that the answers are within you. And we have been conditioned, even in the spiritual community, to look for the next book, the next speaker, the next guru, and to look to them for the information. To even in a way that maybe people have done this with Dolores Cannon, they look to her as someone outside of their own experience that's going to give them something that they in some way don't have within. Any great spiritual teacher will point back to you, to point within you, to show you that they only validate the internal voice, the internal message. And this is truly what a real teacher or guide is, will always point back and self-empower the individual.
Mhm.
And anyone that's not doing that, I always say the same thing: run for the hills,
Have you seen
because
many?
you're only getting another fraud. And we often mistake that. We think that, oh, there wouldn't be anyone in the spiritual community that would be of an egoic structure or trying to mislead me. I hate to break it to you. Unfortunately, we find it in every aspect of life.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you, like, are there people in the spiritual community that are just in it for egoic gratifications, for whatever, selfish purposes and maybe monetary benefits, whatever. But how do you discern that, right, for yourself? How
Mm,
does Paul discern,
mm.
people that are maybe coming from an egoic state more so than someone who's really coming from an open-hearted state?
Yeah. Well, I always, one, I trust my higher awareness, higher, you know, knowledge and that knowingness that we all have. It's not something that I have that you don't have. You see, there's nothing in me that isn't in you and everyone listening. And so when we are giving our power, or when someone is proclaiming to come to them, or they're telling you what to do, I think that is a red flag,
Mm,
because really it's having that ability to decipher. I think is one of the, when it's built up, when we develop that, is probably one of our greatest assets, is when we have, I call it wisdom. And older people tend to have it more so than younger people, because they've been around longer and it gets more of a chance to develop. But we all have that inner wisdom. It's inside us all. I always say, the moment someone's telling you how to live your life, it's not for your greatest purpose. And I came across this lately in some of my work, is that often, even in this day and age, people will share certain messages because they'll know that, particularly through social media, certain topics go viral over others. And if you create content that is controversial and people are arguing back and forth, that content will get shared a lot more. That content will go more viral than other content. And this is how deceptive it can be for all of us in this sort of community, is that some people know that. They've got the knowledge, they've got the expertise to know how all of that works. So they will purposely create content that is going to spark some kind of a debate that's going to get out there more and promote themselves. So we all have to be relying upon our higher awareness when we navigate this experience.
Yeah, I think for me, it's easier for me to discern information like when I can feel it in my body, definitely in my heart center. Like if what I feel is accurate for me, my truth. I mean, it could be anybody's truth. Like someone can tell me something about chakras or energy or like anything, right? Like it could be their truth. It's definitely, it might not be my truth. And it all depends on how I resonate with that message. Like, I feel my body, I check my body. Is it an immediate resistance to that? Like, because the body, muscle testing is a thing. It's how a lot of people, well, after reading some of the literature that I read, recently on muscle testing, it's how people decipher truth from falsehood. It's as simple as raising your arm and testing truth, right? But for me, it's feeling. It's like if I'm hearing Paul Williams speak about consciousness and it resonates with me, like my heart center will really start vibrating. Like I'll get a warm feeling, or you know what I mean. It's like, almost like a remembering almost, right? But if someone starts telling me, like, we all don't want to be told what to do. Like, let's just be honest, right? Like some people want to be told what to do, but most of us who are on our self-actualization journeys don't want to be told like, hey, you gotta go do these things. Maybe we'll do things to explore. Maybe that's a part of the journey. Maybe we have these people in our lives for us to realize that we don't need to do the things that they tell us, that we can find that information on our own, or it's within, right? Like we have to have these experiences. Like it just can't be like this smooth concrete path of like to enlightenment. It's got to be filled with like curves and like freaking storms and you know what I mean, like rabid dogs, and I mean just whatever you can think of for that growth to occur. I mean, there's got to be a negative to a positive, so that way it's something takes, something grows from that. I feel, I don't know if any of that makes sense.
No, totally makes sense. And that's why I love it. Even I made mention of dropping the labels of you, the interviewer, and me, the guest, and actually just opening up and having more of an authentic conversation, because I think even that's more beneficial for the audience, people hearing a conversation happen. I just, my number one thing I go back to is, and I remind myself of this every day. What am I really trying to do here? Am I just trying to build myself, or am I trying to build others? And I think it's more important for me to build people around me, because if I'm not here tomorrow and I've just built myself and my own work and my own thing, that all stops. But if I've invested my time into other people and they're growing and they're changing and they're evolving and doing all that, they continue on. See, we just get caught up in the me, that we forget our interconnectedness to each other. This is just as Dolores said, this is just a costume that you're wearing right now to play this part. There will come a time we will take that off, and you'll move, as Shakespeare so eloquently said, you'll take your exit off the stage and another will come on and take over the show. And it goes on and on and on like that. And it doesn't matter how big we think that we are during this part of the performance, the act will close, the curtain will come down, and you'll be taking your exit. But what did you leave in other people? What inspiration did you leave them? Did you make them better? Did you keep it going energetically? And I love to have this, I'll segue into talking about Dolores Cannon again, is because a lot of people felt like, she became well known after she died. And her name now, I've shared a number of her videos that have just gone viral, and others have done the same. Many people have done that, and it's gone viral. And you get the impression a lot of people say, oh, it's so sad that she's died and it's all ended and we'll just keep rewatching the same videos. I like to remind people, as much as I get a chance, to say she came to start something. She didn't come to finish something and then it's done, it's completed. Everything evolves. Anything that's not evolving is in the process of death. We see this in the plant life, the animal life, everything. Everything is in a state of evolution. And so as soon as we become stagnant, it begins to go through its death stage. Dolores Cannon founded something. We're here. I always say that she laid the foundation, but we are here to build the structure from that foundation. And that's not just about me doing that or you doing that or people like Sarah doing that. It's all of us. We all make up a part of that.
Is there a blueprint for this structure, right? Like, does it come with instructions, I guess? Like,
you are the blueprint. We are all the blueprint. Your individual expression of consciousness is the blueprint. So find out what that is, find out who you are and be that in the world. Let that out, express that only that you can. It's like a part of the building. If you were to speak to a builder and you had a specific part that needs to go together, everything's measured and is exactly the way it should be. And then when you put all the parts together, all the pieces of the puzzle together, they make up something that can be recognized. You often, when you're doing a puzzle, you can't see the picture until many of the small aspects have come together. And then it becomes clear to you and you start to see the image. That is like what we are like. We are like individual pieces of a puzzle that when we come together, we make up a greater picture.
The problem
Things begin to make sense.
The problem is with me, like when I put things together, I usually have a bunch of extra parts left over. So it's kind of like, oh man, I hope this structure stays. But that's the subjective experience, right?
But then when something else comes along, it's like completing a puzzle, right? You might have all these extra pieces, but as someone puts down another piece and another piece, then you find further gaps, and then that piece fills that spot. I think that analogy is something that's really easy to understand, because often we will have certain aspects of ourselves that kind of they don't seem useful right now until somewhere down the track where they show that they do.
Do you think things happen like well, how do I say this? Things happen in our lives, like something will call to us to go somewhere, to a location, and we might not understand why we're being called to that that particular location, and then 5 years from now it will all make sense of why we come here, right? Like, oh, now I know why I went there is because of this was supposed to be lined up and happen. Do you believe in that type of synchronicity?
Absolutely. And often that's the way it presents itself. I mean, I think we've actually had conversations about this. I've been given the message to move cities next year. Now, if I looked at that practically, it doesn't make sense right now. I think this city is more expensive than where I am now. Um, it means I would have to travel more because my family live down here. My mom lives down here. So it means I would have to, if I live there, I would have to travel more. And financially, it doesn't make sense. But there is this higher awareness, this higher aspect of myself that keeps saying that's where you need to be. So often when we get these messages, we don't act upon them because with the analytical aspect, they don't make sense. In fact, they can often sound really foolish decisions to make. But what I've seen so often in my work is that when people don't get those messages and they don't listen to them, because we have choice at the end of the day, you'll get that message over and over again. And if you're not getting it in that way, the higher self will begin to use the body to convey that same message. And that's where we can run into some trouble because we're not living what we're supposed to be doing. And, you know, I had a situation that was a great example of this the other day. And it was something I watched on Gaia TV. And they were talking about illness. And when people get basically a death sentence, they say you've got 3 months to live. And, you know, at the end of the 3 months, you know, that'll be it basically. And what a lot of people do is they go, well, if I'm going to die in 3 months, I'm going to start to really do things differently. So they leave their job, they leave all the toxic things in their life, and then 3 months comes and they're fine. And then 6 months comes and they're fine. And then a year comes and they're still fine. And I've heard people 14, 16, 20 years later, and they're fine. Why are they fine? Because the higher self was trying so hard to communicate with them, to get them out of that situation, that toxic relationship, that toxic workplace. And they weren't listening. And it took a death sentence to wake them up. Immediately after that, they got everything in order. So once the message has been delivered, you don't need the message anymore. So guess what happens? And this is where we see what we perceive as miracles or breakthroughs. I don't even give it that term. I just say that you got the message. So you don't need the message anymore.
What would you do, Paul, if you found out you had a terminal illness and you had 3 months to live? Like one, would you be conscious enough to take it as a message, or what would you do?
Wow, it's such a great question, isn't it? Such a great question. Look, it's funny from my perspective now. I can't I immediately think, well, I know that won't happen to me because I'm open enough to not have to get that message. But let's say it was the case. I would focus on all of the things that I spoke about earlier, you know, continuing to to leave that mark, to inspire others, to help others. Because if I knew that my days were numbered and I had 3 months to live, I would be certainly making sure that whatever I had to give was given and not just left there. And I'm not talking about monetary aspects. I'm talking about inspiring and leaving a mark and helping others and all of those things. Because at the end of the day, when you're on your deathbed, and we're all going to be there, you know, death isn't going to happen to some. It's an inevitability for us all. And we really don't know if that's going to be a lot of years or a couple of years or a couple of days.
Yeah.
But shouldn't we live our lives in a way that it doesn't matter if it is a couple of days, a couple of years, or many years? We're living the same way anyway. I kind of choose to live my life like that. Like if I was to die tomorrow, I actually really do have peace that I was doing everything I was supposed to do. You know,
well, we're all like, to your point, we all have numbered days, right? Like we all have this exit point that could come tomorrow or 30 years, 60 years from now. I think what we need to realize is that we experience miracles every day. We just aren't aware of them, right? Like the sunrise, the sunsets, the you're watching the ocean, a wave come crashing on the shore, a beautiful conversation with a friend, listening to this conversation, just kind of seeing a kid laugh, or my daughter embrace me in a way that only she can embrace me. But we're so busy at trying to live our lives and what we imagine what that should be, that we just are
Oh,
numb
that's
to those.
such a good point. I'm so glad you said that. I'm getting the chills as you said that. And I had this moment yesterday, even for myself, where I was just about to go to bed, and I was taking my dog, my puppy, to the toilet and taking him back, and just those glance of his eyes into mine, and that moment that you can't articulate, the authenticity and the love and the wholeness of that moment, or the look in your daughter's eyes or your son's eyes. That is the miracle. And that is what we so often find ourselves in situations where we're too busy to experience it. We're too busy trying to get money and earn money to impress people that we don't like. We're trying to compete with people that we don't like, and that we forget the miracle that is there every day. When you derive your sense of validation from the likes or the money that you have or all of this, you miss the point. I get my validation not from other people now. I get it from myself, and from, certainly, I think of my beautiful dog, and I get so much love, and that's where I derive it from. And anyone that is really doing anything, like you, for example, you'll never really get great validation from people out there. How many people listen to the podcast or watch this or that? You're going to get all of that from your family.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get your sense of meaning and validation through being a great dad, being a great husband. And if we remembered that, we could let go of a lot of the crap that we subscribe to.
Powerful stuff. Yeah. I mean, community, finding our community, finding power from deriving our power from our community, whatever that looks like. Right. Like,
yeah.
that's,
And then how many people, do you hear, you hear certain things, and this is what gets me frustrated and a little bit angry sometimes, I'll admit, is, you hear certain people say stuff, and then you hear about that person and you go, well, they don't live any of that stuff. They're a fraud. And when I think of legacy, you asked me about it before. One thing I don't want anyone to ever say about me is that he was fake or ingenuous in any way, that he was not what you see is what you get. That's got to be one of the best examples that we can leave, is genuineness. Do you really live what you say publicly behind closed doors? And I find myself asking that a lot, because I know a lot of people that had met Dolores Cannon, for example. The example comes to me straight away. And I've asked a lot of them that have known her intimately, what was she really like? Was she really like that? And consistently I've got that. What you see is what you got. She didn't suffer fools. I think I heard that in your interview from Suzanne, who, when you asked her that question, what was she like? Well, she didn't suffer fools. And that was a great example to me, because sometimes we think to be spiritual and nice, we've got to be really nice and put up with stuff. No, absolutely not. To be really spiritual, you've got to not put up with crap from other people, and you've got to sometimes walk away and break the connection and end the relationship.
Gotta live your truth, man, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely.
And not be scared.
And that's going to be rejecting people. That's going to be walking away from a relationship that no longer serves you because you've outgrown it. but we often think that it's not spiritual, that we have to be a certain way. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you'll ever say to someone is no,
Because you're being authentic to
because you're
yourself.
being authentic. And really, your biggest thing, I believe anyway, because I see so much fakeness in the world, we all do, is to be authentic, whatever that is. Now, I'm in a unique position because as you are, but I'll share something quite personal for me. I share a lot of other people's content on my social media. And, Dolores Cannon, as I said, I share her stuff and it gets, one of the videos got nearly 3 million views. This is how popular she is. And I get pushed from my higher self to put my own content out, to speak, to share messages that I'm getting. And when I initially started doing that, I just got this real disappointment, like I was failing, because I would put out content and it wouldn't get those big views like people that I was sharing. And so what I often did, I just thought, I'm happy just to share other people's stuff. Maybe that's what my thing is. It doesn't matter as long as I'm sharing the message. And I kept getting the message, you had to keep putting it out there. And what I had to learn is to really let go of the numbers and to be okay with what maybe someone would come along and see my stuff and then other people that I share stuff and go, oh, he doesn't get a lot on his. I shared this earlier, but I don't create a lot of, when it comes to personal stuff, I share content that is too controversial. It's generally inspiring others, uplifting others. I've come to accept a lot of that's not going to go viral. It's not going to get big views because people like to hear someone that's going to tell them how to live their life or something controversial that they can comment about and engage with. I'm not going to do that. So already I'm, I guess, solidifying a process in place, but that's okay because if I'm authentic and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and be who I'm supposed to be, it doesn't matter if people are going to validate that or not because I'm doing what I know I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to the point about the noise, right? Like, I think a lot of people get caught up in the noise and what they have to be or what they think that people think that they need to be. And so they keep putting out content that is very similar to everyone else, right? And they're not very
That's
unique to
so
themselves.
true.
So
That
like
is so true.
I think if you
So
go within, right? You go within, you find out who you truly are, Paul, and like what that message is, and then live that message.
I love that you said that because I was having a conversation only yesterday about that. And a friend of mine, she said to me, yeah, don't you just notice with social media now, you'll scroll particularly on reels and it's the same content and people use the same voiceover, the same filters, and it's just the same over and over again. We get so caught up in numbers that we replicate everything continuously over and over again. And we wonder why there's no authenticity, where there's no fresh inspiration, because we're just trying to recreate the same stuff that everyone else is.
Be
What do you think
authentic.
people, yeah, what do you think people mimic the way the Kardashians dress or mimic the way certain celebrities look and dress? Do you want to be a copy or do you want to be an original?
Mm-hmm.
We're all originals. I know when it comes to anything, I think of technology. Would I want the copy of that or would I want the original? No, I would go for the original because I know within it it's a quality product, right? And that's who we are. We are all quality. But the moment you copy yourself or you copy another person, you're just a copy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to your point about a Dolores, like Dolores put out content. Like she was the first Gary V. Like she was putting out
Oh,
so much content and
absolutely.
nobody knew who she was. Like nobody was, she took her 9 years to get her first book published, but she stuck with it because she said, what else would I be doing? I don't know what else. I'm a writer. I'm going to keep doing this. And she did it and she did it and she did it. And she finally published the book, and she lived her entire life. I mean, she, like you said, her stuff right now is just blowing up, and she's no longer here. Right. But she continued. I mean, she was the original Gary Vee. She put everything out there, and now her content is fire. Right. I mean, she did that because for her love of spirituality, for her love of growth, for her love of consciousness, for her, I mean, she was a trailblazer in hypnosis. I mean, she did it for the love of the thing that she connected with. And I think that's the message here is if you love the thing that you're doing, like you don't, like if you're going to be original anyway, because you're going to bring that part of you into that project. You know, I might not get a million downloads, but that means that I am bringing forth who I am authentically. And there's only one Trey, right? I'm just living my truth, being my truth, and putting it out there for people who resonate with that truth. And not everyone's going to be at the same level I am. And so maybe 30 years from now, 50 years from now, maybe even when I pass on, maybe my truth will still be here. Maybe people will resonate with that then too. But I'm going to live my life as authentic as I can and be the best version of Trey that I could possibly be. So that way my kids can see, you know, my dad never quit. Like, he did the thing that he loved. And that's the message that I want to drive home is like, if you love the thing that you're doing, don't ever quit. Don't ever stop. Just keep going. Like, because that to me that's the part of life. That's the point of life, is to find a thing that you love.
That's it. And we get so caught up in what other people think, don't we? The numbers. We got to get a certain amount of numbers, or we compare ourselves to other people all the time. That we, like I said, we get trapped in this paradigm of comparing. And then when we don't feel we're good enough because we see other people doing it better. And you know what people so sadly do is they drop who they are and then they go copy that other person. Well, it worked for them. I'll just be like them.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that, and I'm glad you mentioned Gary Vee, because I think of two of the most inspiring people that have inspired me. One is Gary Vee, actually. He is, I know he's not seen as a spiritual person because he's, you know, in there more of an entrepreneur, but he is sharing some of the greatest spiritual wisdom I have heard, and he's living it. And let me tell you about authenticity. This guy is authentic. I can tell who's putting it on and not. And this guy is successful beyond what people could dream about, but authentic at the same time. And so I just think authenticity is such the key for us all. And if I'm really honest about it, right now, when I look at even people in the spiritual community, I have to be honest, I don't see a lot of authenticity. I see a lot of copies. I see a lot of people doing what other people do, but I see very little authenticity. And perhaps what we need to learn in these times that we find ourselves in is to find that within us and express that in a bigger way than we have before.
Double down on the go within, right? Like double down on going within and receiving your truth. And don't be afraid if it's someone else's falsehood, right? Like, don't be afraid if my message doesn't resonate with you. As long as I'm resonating with my message and I find that it is my truth, ring that bell, baby. Ring that bell, and don't be afraid.
Absolutely. And I think we often get intimidated because we think, well, you know, if I don't offer, you know, if I don't have a course, you know, I'm thinking of people in the spirit, if I don't have a book or a course where I'm telling people they need to get this, in other words, go outside of what they have already, then I won't make money or I won't be successful. So we get caught in this illusion that we somehow have to, you know, empower ourselves and then others can't win at the same time. But that is a complete misconception.
Mm.
Because if you are truly authentic and you're truly embodying that, people will be so attracted to what you have to offer, regardless of what that is in your personal life, in your professional life. The world needs more authenticity, not less of it.
Sure. I know what I need more of, man. It's more time with you because this is
Yes.
we can get
I
pretty
know
deep.
we tend to just fly through it, and well, that's when the energy's right. Things flow, right?
Absolutely. Flow states. Paul Williams. Paul, my friend, buddy, bro. Thank you for joining, man. Thank you for
Yes.
taking the time. Where can people find you? Like throw that out there. The Instagram, website, YouTube.
Absolutely. The easiest place to find all of my links is pwilliamsofficial.com. P for Paul Williams official.com. And you'll find all my links to everything I do, all my social media there.
Hmm. Paul, my man, we got to do this again.
Absolutely. And you're always welcome on whatever I'm doing. So I believe in you. I believe in what you have to give, and I think you've got a great show, and you've done incredibly well in getting to this part. And as I like to say to all people I work with, the best is yet to come.